Welcome back, I'm Bill. Today I've got a model 3470 made by the American Gas Machines Company. This is kind of a neat lantern. It's actually a military lantern, but it's not like the usual military lanterns we think of. It was made during World War II and it's a kerosene model. It's basically equivalent to Coleman's Model 237. There's not a lot of information out there on these. I have heard some people say that they were more popular with the US Navy than the US Army, perhaps because kerosene's less volatile than gasoline. Maybe if you know more about that or about this model in particular, feel free to comment below. I don't know how common or uncommon they are. They're certainly uncommon up here in Canada. I found this in the States on my last trip down and brought it back with me. What is very common with these is stress cracks in the fount. AGM brass founts from this time period are notorious for stress cracks, and pretty much everybody I've talked to who's found one of these 3470s discovered it was full of stress cracks, and I discovered this was full of stress cracks. So this lantern will be in multiple videos here on the channel. Keep your eyes open for them. I'm not going to show it in this video because it's too much detail and would take too much time. And I don't want to make another long video, but I will be using Caswell's 2-part epoxy gas tank sealer on this in order to preserve the fount and get the lantern up and running again. So that'll be a separate video. You can keep your eyes tuned for that. But let me go ahead and move you around and get you in closer here, and we'll start taking this apart. So this has both a vent nut and the bail that goes through the vent and into the manifold. And I'm pretty sure that this is the original globe that just says Pyrex on it. And see if we can this wing nut off, and then everything will come off. This is the wrench. I'll use a different wrench though. And we've got a preheat cup here. Looks like we've got a little spring down here that should be sitting on top of it and holding it in place. And we've got some fibrous material in here that I'm guessing is asbestos. Let's go ahead and take this remnant of a mantle off. Now that that's off, that nut is off, we should just be able to lift everything up here. I don't know if this will all come out in one piece or not. I'm assuming the idea is that this sort of holds the alcohol used for preheating, sort of saturates all this. Again, I'm pretty sure it's asbestos, as opposed to just having a plain old preheat cup. And I think this might look like someone just packed something in there, but since it is a mess, I'm not going to worry about replacing it. We're just going to get rid of it. If it is asbestos, it certainly doesn't have the texture I would expect. Anyways, clean out more of that later. It's definitely doesn't have the texture of any asbestos I've encountered before. Now, I think this is going to function all as one piece. The burner cap is cast to the manifold. It looks like our air tube is crimped in. We could remove this support piece I'm not going to remove the vent stud. There's no point to doing that. So I think we're going to have to just work on this all as one piece. And we've had visitation by mud daubers. Turn this around. The fuel cap is chained on this, so let's deal with that. Tighten this down really good and tight. Need to get that rubber gasket, which is hard as a rock, cinched down on there so that this screw will come out. And once that comes out, while we're doing this, we might as well take the fuel cap off. Inside the fount. We're going to put the fuel cap back on before too long here, though. And so some mud daubers had been here, so we'll go ahead and take the generator off first. Looks like that'll break off some of this dust. Cleaning needle still, that's positive. And take the tip off the generator so we can clean that. And we may or may not be able to get the springs out of the inside. It looks pretty good on this end, but I'm going to bet they're it's going to take some more effort to get those springs out. They're probably all coked up inside there. So we'll set that aside for now. Oh, we've even got some larvae in there. Who knows how old those are? Now our collar will come off. And let's just, the chain is just held on. We'll just bend this back. And pinch it together. If we can. There we go. And take the badge off. It's just held in with these tabs. Loosen the other tabs as well. That really doesn't want to let go, does it? There we go. This badge is in great shape. And there's our collar. And here is our fount and valve. So let's take the screws out of our pump cap. And I'm going to pause right there to do a dunk test on this. I told you I was going to dunk test this, and I'll have a separate video on that process. But in the meantime, you can see here, look at that fount fizzle like a champagne bottle. So everything else here is fine. Our check valve isn't leaking. I've got the fuel cap on so tightly it's not leaking, but it does need a new gasket. You can see the bung isn't leaking, and our valve is fine. So everything's good here except the fount. So I'm going to use an epoxy sealer on that. So let's get back to taking our valve out. So now that we know this fount is totally compromised, let's get to work taking the rest of this apart. Take our pump apart. AGMs don't have a separate air stem like a Coleman does. This blade just locks into the check valve and turn it to, I mean, in that respect, it's like a Coleman. You turn it one way to lock it and another way to unlock it, but it's not a separate part. And we have to grab this again. And our spring and cap. And that's all there is for the pump. I'm going to leave the check valve in place because, as we saw during the dunk test, there were no bubbles coming out of there. So we know the check valve's fine. Since it's fine, there's no point dealing with it. So take our fuel cap off. And this gasket is pretty much shot. It only sealed because I had it as tight as it was, so we'll replace that. I'll throw up a link for the video on that. That's a separate video. And I guess we might as well take all of this off. Before we take the valve out. Just unscrew this, and you can see the graphite packing is coming out of there. And there's our valve stem. Take the knob off. And we can take all of this apart. So I'm going to leave the cleaning lever in place. There's graphite packing in here. We can unscrew the nut that tightens on it, but this lever doesn't easily come out with that packing intact. So this part of the valve I'm going to leave in one piece. You can see if this is going to come off. This is just to, there's a nut on here, it's a stud, and that holds the uppers on it, and then there's a nut that adjusts the height and locks it in here. Now, let's take the valve out. I've got a 3/4 inch wrench here. Actually, let's put it on that hex and make sure it's on there well. I'm just going to take a usually AGMs aren't too tight. The trick is turn against the wrench. Don't turn against the fount or you'll spin the bung. If I wasn't going to be resealing this fount, I might be tempted just to leave the valve in place since this is a kerosene lantern. There's nothing fancy on the underside of this. Or there shouldn't be. Well, maybe AGMs are a little bit different. Usually on a kerosene there's just an open pickup tube, but this actually has a pickup on it, the same as our gasoline lanterns. This is the first time I've ever actually worked on a AGM kerosene. So we just want to pull this little wire retainer up. Sometimes they're hard to get a hold of initially. We want to try not to destroy this brass mesh. The brass mesh serves as a filter. The reason they put a filter on here, and don't try to flatten this out, just clean it the way it is and then slip it back on, and we'll save the little retainer clip. This would be why they've got the filter on here. This is actually set up just like their gasoline models, except that there's no air inlet into the valve here. But it has a tiny little orifice here, and that orifice is prone to clogging very easily if you get any sediment in the fount. So that's why that's like that. I'm not sure why they designed the pickup that way. Usually, again, just an open tube. And this is, I can see it soldered in place, so we won't take this apart any further. That's as much as we'll do with the valve. And there's our fount. And I've already cleaned it up a bit since we were at the sink. But we'll soap and water the vent, and the glass is pretty clean, but we'll use some soap and water on that too. All right, let's just put some soap and water on these parts. Normally I use Simple Green, but this isn't that bad. I'm just using some Dawn. More dusty than anything else. This is really in the crevices. Yeah, apart from this one chip, this is actually a pretty decent vent. And the glass is already pretty clean. Before we go any further, I just wanted to come back to the generator and to the burner assembly. It's a couple days later. I've decided to just let this sit with some seafoam deep creep here, and I applied some heat to it, and it still does not want to budge, which is not uncommon on these AGM designs. This in particular, it's just in there, I think, forever. So since this is a small piece of steel, I don't want to snap it off, so we're just going to work on this as it is, as I planned. The generator, I left some carb cleaner soaking in there, and sprayed it in a couple of times, let it sit, and eventually was able to pull the guts out. And you can see this happens with kerosene generators. It's all coked up, and you can see how it crumbles as we unscrew the two springs. So the good thing is, kerosene generators, everybody thinks, oh, it's toast. Well, no, it's not. If you can get the inside out, either burning it out with a propane torch or with some carb cleaner just to loosen it up. Normally I'd use a propane torch, as you've seen in my generator video, but I didn't think this would be that bad, so I just tried carb cleaner, but it worked enough to free it up. These actually aren't difficult to recover. I mean, at this point, you don't really need to do any more to this. The generator, the walls inside actually look pretty good. I'd run a brush through there. But at this point, you could just put this, you've got it cleaned up enough, you could put this back together, put it back in service. One other thing I wanted to touch on, because it just occurred to me, you know, this is like a Coleman 237. Could we use a Coleman 237 generator in a pinch? Say this thing was toast. And of course, these are very difficult to find. So I was just curious about that. This looks a little on the short side for a 237 generator, but hey, let's have a look. There's a 237 generator. There's this guy. So just in case you were wondering, no, you can't replace that with a 237 generator. You know, a lot of the AGMs, you can get away with Coleman swaps. A lot of them you can use, say, a 220 generator on the 2572s and similar models, but not on this. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this in with our other parts, and these will go in our citric acid bath. Our brass and steel parts are simmering away here. This is a mixture of water and citric acid powder. I mix about roughly 1 teaspoon per liter of water. It's not a magic number, but that about gets the job done. You can strengthen it up if you need to, which I may have to do with this burner assembly. We'll see how it comes out. Yeah, I'll let this simmer away for at least 30 minutes. I'm going to take the valve out pretty quickly. It's got a graphite packing on the tip cleaner assembly, and I don't want that in there too long, or it'll sort of get rough or difficult to turn, but a few minutes won't hurt it. All right, we've got our parts slowly coming out of the citric acid bath, so I will polish these on the polishing wheel, but before we do that, I will be rinsing them off, and I'll be using some fine 4/0 steel wool to just clean all the crud off. That already looks remarkably better, doesn't it? Most of these parts you could leave them at this point if you sort of wanted them to look factory. I'm going to go ahead and polish them up a bit more with the buffing wheel though. Here's our burner assembly. It probably needs to be in there longer, but let's see how it'll clean up. Sometimes it's hard to know how much is corrosion and how much is just soot that's baked on. It looks like there's a lot of soot that's baked on. far the plating on that actually looks pretty decent. Here's our generator tube. I'll do the same thing with it as far as the brush goes. Lots of nasty stuff in there. This generator should run like new when we're done with it. Got our parts freshly out of the citric acid and rubbed down with steel wool. Now we're going to polish them. I'm using a cotton buffing wheel and I'm using some white No. 5 polishing compound. That looks great. So our fount is Caswelled up, it's sealed, it has passed the dunk test. So the next thing I want to do is polish this thing up, being careful of the lettering. The stenciling on here is one reason I wanted to keep this. So I found Mother's Mag aluminum polish, despite what it says, is actually excellent on paint, and it does a much better job than automotive polish or paint polish does. So I'm just going to put some of that on terry cloth rag and start polishing. This will also polish brass. can really see the stress cracks now. But they are sealed. All right. I'm going to go over this section just a little bit more, very lightly. Paying close attention to the lettering. There we go, that's better. Okay. All right, let's put this together. We'll start with our valve. I've already got the valve stem in from when I pressure tested this. So we'll just put the pickup on. And the fun part is getting this little clip on. I had to make a new one because the old one went missing in my citric acid bath. I need to open this up just a bit more. If that does it, I think that'll do it. And I've got to get it in the groove. And then we've got to pinch it closed. Sometimes it's easier said than done. All right, that's on there. So that's the whole valve. I'm going to put some Permatex blue on here. Just to make sure that we get a good seal. It's tapered brass, so it shouldn't be necessary, but sometimes it is. I need to pinch that a bit more to get it through the opening. We want the filler on that side and the pump on this side. This is why I use Permatex blue, because I can tell that's the final turn and I was able to do it hand tight. So the Permatex blue will make sure that that is good and sealed. Our pump, paper towel here. The pump is already put together again because I was testing or pressure testing. I'll just add some 3-in-1 oil here. It's in pretty good shape. And the check valve was just fine, so I left it in place. Itty bitty screws. There's one, and there's two. These are always great fun to try to get in. And at least our holes line up here. All right. That's good. Put our knob back on. And a little screw for that, but not quite as small. Let's get that knob up and down. There we go. And there's our valve. Now, I think that should be good. That's for setting the height for the burner, and it was a little on the low side to start with, so. And now we've got our collar, so we want to put the badge back on. And bend this out just a bit. Cleaned up nicely. Actually, the whole color cleaned up pretty nicely. And that goes like that. And oh, before we put that on, we should reattach our fuel cap chain. So that's going to be on there like that. So let's put, actually, let's just put it through here. Best way to spread these. Needle nose. There, that's perfect. There we go. And since we've got that on, let's do our fuel cap and a new cap gasket. All right, there's our gasket. Slide that over. In this case, we'll reattach the chain. Now let's see, we want our burner assembly. We've got a little screw to put back on here. Will that be enough? Let's make sure this is enough. Yeah, I think we're actually going to want to raise this just a bit. very low to start with. These chains seem to have been a thing with military lanterns. Okay, and that all looks good, I think. Make sure there's clearance for our generator nut. There we go. Actually, that tells me that this wrench is going to have to go on later. In fact, let's just put the generator on first. Cleaned the springs. I just need to slide the small one into the big one. Oops, they're pretty flexible there. And we want to slide the needle in, or the cleaning rod, without damaging our needle. And then we'll put the whole thing back in. And let's needle up, and yeah, we're good. I want to make sure that it goes through the hole properly and doesn't hang up. And somewhere here we've got oh, there it is. I'm going to take the generator tip off until we've got everything seated properly. That way I don't bend the needle. We can see it going up and down and up and down. So that's good. Now, this is the advantage of these single mantle lanterns, where you can take the whole burner assembly off and get access to that tip. I can see it going up and down, so we're good there. So we'll put the burner assembly back on again, and that now mates nicely with our manifold. And we've got lots of space now for this wing nut. Make sure that the collar is centered. Now that everything's polished, this little spring coil simply holds the preheat cup so that it doesn't, if you turn the lantern over, you don't want your preheat cup falling down and knocking into your mantle. That's what that does. So yeah, we're good here. So let's tie on a mantle. I'm going to put on an old vintage Coleman 1111. I think this is worth it. there. Might have to pull our thread through just a little bit. String there. Boy. There. And there's hardly anything there to grab. Out a bit. That's good. There we go. All right, we're gassed up, or again, kerosened up. We're fueled up. Let's burn this mantle in. We'll just be patient. Let's see. This is why I usually use matches. All right, that's a good start. Line up the holes. That's one side. Next the other. I think we're good. So let's add our alcohol. We've got an alcohol bottle here. This is what we use to preheat if you've never lit a kerosene lantern. Need to fill that cup. All right, let's forget the lighter. Match. There we go. And while we're waiting for that, let's pump it up. We want the, I can see a little blue glow there. We'll just wait for that alcohol to burn off. By the time it burns off, that will have preheated the generator. And if we open the valve just before all the alcohol is gone, it will also light the kerosene when we open the valve. Now, if you don't preheat it enough and you open the valve, the kerosene will ignite, and eventually the generator will get hot, but it will be very sooty in the meantime. If you don't preheat it at all and you open the valve and try to light it, you'll have a fireball because liquid kerosene will just run down everywhere. If the generator just isn't quite hot enough, you'll just make a mess. But you definitely need to preheat it. And And just keep an eye on the alcohol cup. Wait until it's just about empty. Depending on ambient temperature, it may take a little less. See how it just took off there? That's the beauty of kerosene. And it's running wonderfully. They do tend to be a little on the noisy side though. So that should be about 500 candle power. Let me cut the lights. That looks great, and I'm really pleased that we've saved another one. This one was toast, and the moths are already at it. This one was toast, but thanks to some epoxy gas tank sealant, we've got it going again. And this time it won't stress crack. Thanks for watching.